Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jeff Rumberg. I'm a managing partner with MetricNet, and I will be your host for today's webcast on call center best practices. I want to welcome all of you and thank you for participating in our webcast today. Before we get started, I have just a few administrative announcements to make. During the presentation, all of you will be in listen-only mode. However, if you have any questions during the webcast, you can type them in the dialog box that appears in the lower right corner of your screen. I will pause once during the presentation to answer questions. Additionally, I will remain on the webcast at the conclusion of the presentation to answer any final questions that you might have or that I did not get to during the first Q&A break. This webcast typically lasts about 90 minutes. So for those who have other commitments later in the day, I should be wrapped up by about 3:30 or so Eastern Time in the United States. Now, I see that quite a few of our existing clients have joined us on the webcast today, and I want to thank you for that. For those who are not familiar with MetricNet, let me give you just a brief introduction. MetricNet's core business is benchmarking. We perform benchmarks for a variety of industries and functional areas. My role in the company is to manage the call center, service desk, and desktop support benchmarks and client relationships for MetricNet. The work we do for call centers worldwide spans the gambit, from benchmarking and best practice assessments to consolidation studies and outsourcing analyses. Typically, the call centers that we work with are looking to optimize their performance, and we help them achieve that objective through benchmarking. Now, for those who have not been to our new website yet, I would encourage you to go and take a look around at MetricNet.com. One of the unique features of the website is that we offer a free membership that gives you unlimited access to all of our content. This includes our Metric of the Month, our webcast recordings, white papers, and presentations. All you have to do is complete a short form, and you will be enrolled as a free member. Each time you visit our website thereafter, you can go directly to our resource library to access all of our online content absolutely free of charge. Now, since the question of how to benchmark comes up in every webcast we conduct, I'll preempt that question right now and give you just a brief overview of MetricNet's benchmarking lineup. There are three ways that you can complete a benchmark with MetricNet. First, we have what are called peer group benchmarks that compare your call center, service desk, or desktop support performance to that of a unique peer group. These are our custom benchmarks, and they're very comprehensive in scope. The peer groups are selected from our benchmarking database based upon your call center's scope, scale, complexity, and geography. For example, it's common to select a peer group from your geography and vertical industry, and to also ensure that there is comparability in the number of contacts handled, since call centers are scale sensitive. Secondly, if you're only interested in industry benchmarking data, you can download an industry benchmarking report directly from our website. Just go to MetricNet.com, click the Shop button, a shop selection that is, in the upper navigation bar, and you will see our call center, service desk, and desktop support industry benchmarks that are available for download. And finally, for those do-it-yourselfers, you can purchase a benchmarking data file in Excel format and conduct your own benchmarking analysis. Now, regardless of how and when you choose to benchmark your organization, I want to encourage all of you to connect with MetricNet on social media. We're active on all the major social media sites. We put out a steady stream of posts, tweets, articles, discussions, and presentations that are designed to enrich the community of call center and IT support professionals and to provide you with tools, insights, and information that you can use to enhance your professional careers. For those who would like to follow us on Twitter during the webcast, use hashtag MetricNetLive to participate and share your thoughts, key points, questions, or just follow along. One final note before we get started, and this is particularly important for those who wish to receive a copy of today's presentation. When you exit the webcast, a brief survey will pop up on your screen. Please be aware that only those who complete the survey will receive a copy of today's presentation. This survey provides us with valuable feedback on the webcast. It's only 3 questions long, and it takes about 15 seconds to complete. So if you do us a favor and answer that survey at the end of the webcast, I'd be very grateful, and in return for that courtesy, I will send you a copy of today's presentation. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We've got 4 things on the agenda for today. We're going to start with what I call the customer contact imperative. And we're going to talk a little bit about how call centers have evolved away in the last 10 years from tactical support functions to, in many cases, a strategic source of competitive advantage. We'll spend a few minutes on that topic, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what I call our research methodology. I'm going to be presenting a lot of data in today's presentation, and I think it's helpful to understand where that data has come from. There again, I'll spend just a few minutes because where I want to spend the bulk of my time today is on our model for call center best practices, which addresses metrics, diagnosis using benchmarking, prescription or action planning, and then the implementation of those action plans. This is where we'll spend most of our time in today's webcast. And then I'll wrap up at the end with a call to action and some tips and pointers on what you can do in the near term, i.e. next 7 to 10 days, to gain some benefit immediately from today's webcast. So let's go ahead and get started with the customer contact imperative. All of you know, if you've been working for any time at all, that every industry is in transition and every company or government organization or MPO faces increasing pressure from a whole lot of different sources. In many industries, there's consolidation going on. There's now more regulatory scrutiny than there has ever been in the past. We've got the emergence of virtual businesses. We see this in banking and other types of businesses. Customers, in many cases, expect one-stop shopping when they go to your website or when they contact the contact center. For those of you that are publicly traded, there's shareholder pressure, there's budgetary constraints, customers grow increasingly demanding over time, and customers have greater choice and leverage than ever before. But in the midst of all of this, companies are beginning to rediscover the possibility of creating a competitive advantage at the customer interface. And so they're recognizing the growing importance of customer contact as an opportunity to build a sustainable competitive advantage. Now, if you think about it, on average, you're contacting your mortgage company, your banker, your insurance company, your credit card company. It might be once, twice a month, sometimes less than that, but on average, these organizations are only talking to their customers for a limited period of time. It's estimated that they talk to their customers on average between 7 and 22 minutes per year. Now think about that. When you call your retail bank, or when you call your mortgage company, or when you call your insurance company or your credit card company, you expect them to be available 24/7. So the expectation is that they will provide anytime, anyplace service 8,760 hours per year. Yet when you're only talking to them between 7 and 22 minutes per year, that represents a real moment of truth opportunity. And the contact center can either create loyalty and build positive word-of-mouth referrals and potentially even build market share and repeat business through those limited contacts, or they can do just the opposite. This is a high leverage opportunity to build that loyalty, to build repeat business, to build positive word-of-mouth referrals, but it's also a high leverage opportunity to do just the opposite of that. And so what we want to talk about today is how you take these limited opportunities, these moments of truth, and you leverage those into a competitive advantage for your organization. As the recognition of this has set in over the last 5 to 7 years, the old paradigm of managing contact centers has given way to a very new and different paradigm. The old paradigm viewed the call center as a support function. Many of our clients even referred to it, in some cases, I hate to say this, but they refer to their contact centers as a necessary evil. We have to have them because those pesky customers keep contacting us about different things. They were viewed historically as a supplement to traditional brick-and-mortar facilities like a walk-in office, a walk-in insurance office, for example, or a walk-in retail bank. But in many cases, these call centers were playing catch-up to customer needs and expectations. They were managed very reactively. And in this environment, the goal was mere customer satisfaction. The new paradigm turns this old paradigm on its head and says, in effect, that what we want to do is create value at this interface. We want to differentiate our company's products and services by virtue of the quality of service that we offer. So it doesn't matter if the customer thinks insurance is a commodity or credit cards are a commodity or that mortgages are a commodity. We're going to uncommoditize that by offering a level of quality of service at the customer contact point that is unmistakable, that will drive customer satisfaction, or even better, customer enthusiasm, and product differentiation. In this new paradigm, the service that goes along with the product is considered two sides of the same coin. So you've got the product and you've got the service that goes along with it. And they become indistinguishable in this new paradigm. And the quality of service has the potential to differentiate what might otherwise be considered a commodity product. And in fact, it's been demonstrated now that increasingly customer buying decisions are based, at least in part, on the expectation of the quality of service that will come after that initial product purchase is made. So this new paradigm is replacing the old paradigm. Now, it was more than a dozen years ago, a client sent this comic to me. And what it reads is, delight customers, why can't we just satisfy them like we used to? Well, the reason is that satisfied customers are not loyal customers. They're not necessarily customers that are choosing to do business with you. They're doing business with you because they have to. But as I pointed out on the prior page, what we're after here is customer enthusiasm. These are customers that want to do business with you, that are sticky to this channel, that is, they're loyal to you, and they're going to be propagating positive word-of-mouth referrals, and as a result, you can potentially build market share and grow revenue as a result of the quality of the customer service that you provide. Now, what we have seen in this industry is that contact centers tend to evolve through three stages. Newer contact centers and contact centers that have not evolved very far tend to operate in what we call the support paradigm or the support stage. These call centers are oftentimes very chaotic. They're oftentimes focused almost exclusively on service levels. However, at some point, many of these call centers begin to recognize that there's got to be a better way to do things, and they start making investments in training and tools and technology that enable them to become more proactive. And those that are the most successful in this migration, in this evolution, become what we call strategic stage call centers, and it's the strategic stage call centers that are focused on creating value, differentiation, and driving customer enthusiasm. And as much as anything else, today's webcast is about helping you understand these different phases of evolution and taking the steps that are necessary to help you evolve as quickly and efficiently and effectively as you possibly can. Our research, unfortunately, shows that fully almost 2/3 of call centers worldwide operate in this traditional customer contact paradigm, the so-called support stage. Another 30%, almost 1/3, are in this transitional, sometimes called the growth stage, where they are making these investments in training and tools and technology. But only about 5% of call centers worldwide, based on our research, truly operate strategically, where the contact center is a competitive advantage, where the contact center does represent a source of differentiation and helps to drive product sales, customer loyalty, and repeat business. Let's talk briefly now about the research methodology. I personally have been at this for a long time, more than a quarter of a century. And during that time, I've had the opportunity to work on more than 2,000, almost 3,000 contact center benchmarks. Now, as a result, we've created the most comprehensive database of call center performance and process indicators in the industry. We track more than 30 KPIs, everything from cost per contact and speed of answer to customer satisfaction and first contact resolution rate. We have also cataloged and created a taxonomy of nearly 80 industry best practices. These best practices address everything from call center strategy and human resources to technology, stakeholder communication, and performance measurement and management. Now, one of the things I want to point out that of the nearly 3,000 call centers that have been profiled worldwide, we cover just about every 3-digit SIC code. We cover a lot of different industries, including banks and financial services, telecom, healthcare, hospitality, insurance, manufacturing, retail, transportation, utilities, and other industries. And it's important to point out that the best practices that we have identified amongst call centers worldwide are relatively independent of the industry. In fact, I would go so far as to say that regardless of which vertical market you're in, there is at least 80% commonality from industry to industry in the best practices that we will be presenting here today. Now, since we use the term world-class quite a bit, I do want to define what a world-class call center is. The first component of our definition is this. You have to have high levels of customer satisfaction, meaning that you have to deliver high-quality service. Secondly, cost matters. And so we like to see that cost per contact is below industry average levels and that the revenue generated, if you are in a revenue-generating call center like telemarketing and telesales or collections, we like to see that the revenue generated is above industry average levels on a per call or per agent basis. So the first part is high quality. Second part, low cost, high revenue. Third part, a bit more subjective. You're following industry best practices. And this is not a hard thing to do now because the industry best practices are pretty well defined and documented. We like to see that the call center is following industry best practices. And then perhaps most subjectively of all, that every transaction adds value. This means that the customer has a positive experience, it improves their loyalty to you and to this channel, and it creates positive brand awareness and switching costs. So there are 4 components of that definition. Now graphically, I would describe it as such. If we look at a 2-dimensional chart where we've got cost per contact on the x-axis and quality measured by customer satisfaction on the y-axis, we get a locus of points as illustrated by these blue circles here. Now, most contact centers are going to operate somewhere in the range of this, what we call the average performance curve, which is this dashed line. Only those that are fully optimized operate on this upper curve. We call this the best-in-class performance curve. Now, we get asked almost every day what it means to be best-in-class or what it means to be world-class. Does it mean that my abandonment rate has to be under 1%, that my cost per call has to be under $5, that customer satisfaction has to be above 90%? Well, the answer is it depends. It depends on the resources you have at your disposal. If you're spending $2 or $3 per call and manage to eke out a reasonable level of customer satisfaction, what that means is that you are doing the absolute best job you can with the limited resources that you have, and we would consider that to be a world-class call center. Likewise, if you're spending $100 or $200 per contact and you manage to achieve the best possible result with the resources you have, that would also be considered a world-class contact center. So there is no absolute definition of what it means to be world-class. It's a relative definition relative to the resources that you have at your disposal. And the real question is this: are you using the limited dollars, headcount, technology, office space, and all the other resources you have and deploying those in such a way that you achieve the best possible result? If you are a world-class call center. Now, I want to point out a couple of other things about this particular chart. You will notice that there is a relationship between cost and customer satisfaction, or cost and quality. That is not a spurious correlation. That is a cause and effect relationship. And in some cases, organizations will drive quality based on cost constraints, meaning that cost drives quality. In other organizations, quality will drive cost because the organization is trying to hit some minimum level of quality, and that in turn will dictate what the costs are. But the relationship is nonlinear, which suggests that as quality increases, cost increases disproportionately. Now, this is not a surprise. This is true of just about any product or service that you might purchase. Typically, as the quality goes up, cost goes up disproportionately. It's true when you buy homes, cars, seats on airplanes, or anything else. As the quality goes up, so too does the cost. So there are diminishing returns. And what that says is that you can never afford 0 defects. You can never afford 100% customer satisfaction. You have to recognize that you can never get to perfection. It would simply be too expensive. Most organizations tend to operate in this midpoint here, slope of about 45 degrees, where I guess that would mean that the derivative is 1 at that point, where cost and quality are in equilibrium, meaning that they're in healthy tension with each other. And make no mistake about it, cost and quality do create a tension within an organization, and the trick is to find the point of minimum tension, the point where you are achieving the best possible quality with the resources that you have at your disposal. Now that leads me to the first polling question of our webcast. Let me go ahead and open that polling question, and as you can imagine, it's going to address what it means to be world-class. And so the first polling question of the day is this: do you consider your call center to be world-class based on the way I've just defined it? Do you consider your call center to be world-class? Now, while you're answering that, just want to shout out to a few of you who've joined us today. And by the way, we've got individuals from more than 20 countries on our webcast today. Some of you are dialing in the middle of the night in places like Singapore and Japan and Australia. I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I want to welcome Andrea Lusher, and I'm just picking these names at random. Thanks for joining us. There's Eric Rodriguez. Eric, great to see you. Jeff Augustino, thanks for joining us. Leo Gillis, great to have you here. Nancy Pigeon, thanks for coming. Great to see you here. Paul Valenzuela, great to see you. Okay, we've got almost 90% of you weighed in on this question. If you haven't answered the polling question yet, do you consider your call center to be world-class? Please answer the polling question. We'll wrap up this poll, and I'll show you the results right now. Okay, this is a fairly typical result. 25% of you, based on the definition that I've just provided, consider your call center to be world-class. Another 62% of you do not consider your call centers to be world-class, so it's about a 2-to-1 ratio or almost 3-to-1 ratio of no's to yeses. And then 13% not applicable, presumably because you don't actually operate in a call center environment. And again, this is a fairly typical result. The good news is that if you're not yet world-class, there's a relatively straightforward path to get there. It doesn't have to take a lot of time. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money. And the roadmap that I lay out over the next hour here does, in fact, provide you with those markers, with that path that you can travel and move forward on to achieve world-class performance in a relatively short period of time without spending an inordinate amount of resources. So thank you for participating in that poll. We're going to go ahead and move on now. And at this point, we're going to switch gears and begin talking about our model for best practices, which addresses performance measurement, diagnosis, that is interpreting the measures, prescription, which is action planning, and then where the rubber meets the road, implementation. So we've got a 4-part model here, all arrayed around the central objective, not of customer satisfaction, which, as I told you earlier, is a losing proposition, but arrayed around the central objective of customer enthusiasm. That is what we are after. It's those loyal customers, those sticky customers, the customers that will come back to us time and time again and will propagate positive word-of-mouth referrals and help us grow our market share and our revenue. Now, the 4 components of the model, measurement, diagnosis, prescription, and implementation, are synergistic. That is, they are self-reinforcing. You can be just average in each of these 4 areas, and you will have a world-class call center. By contrast, if you are excellent in 3 of the 4 areas and weak in a 4th area, you will not have a world-class call center. All it takes is slightly above average performance in each of these 4 areas in order to have a world-class contact center. Now, let me give you a medical analogy here to make this model come alive. And by the way, the model is very, very empirical in nature. It reflects what we have seen in the industry time and time and time again. So it's a very simple model, but one that's very powerful and reflects empirically what we see in the industry. Now, if you go to see a doctor, one of the first things that doctor is going to do, whether you're there for a physical or because you're not feeling well, what have you, they're going to take some measurements. They might measure your blood pressure, your temperature. They might do an EKG. They might do some blood work. But it typically starts with measurement. But a good doctor isn't going to say, oh, gosh, you're sick. Your temperature's high. Your blood pressure's elevated. Go home and get better. A good doctor is going to look at that information and develop a diagnosis. That is, that doctor is going to determine what is going on with you. Then what they're going to do is prescribe something, not necessarily drugs, but it could be. It might be a prescription for change in lifestyle, like stop smoking, stop drinking, sleep more, whatever it might be. It might be a prescription for surgery. It might be a prescription for drugs. But there's a prescription that follows that diagnosis, and it's up to you, the patient, to implement that prescription so that you, in fact, get the benefits of that measurement, that diagnosis, and that prescription. So it is a continuous process of measurement, diagnosis, prescription, and implementation in the call center, all arrayed around the central objective, once again, not of customer satisfaction, but of customer enthusiasm. That is what we are after, our enthusiastic, loyal customers that want to be doing business with us. So we're going to go through each one of the components of the model, talking about performance measurement, diagnosing what those measures mean, developing action plans, which is part 3, prescription, and then implementing those action plans. Let me start by bifurcating the 2 types of call center metrics. We have what are called operational metrics, which are those metrics that you use to manage your call center internally. You're probably familiar with a lot of them, things like cost per contact, customer satisfaction, speed of answer, and so on. And then we have what are called business effectiveness metrics. And these measure how effective you are in supporting the company's business mission. Oftentimes they are P&L related or revenue related. They're generally externally focused. Typical examples would include, for example, sales generated per call center headcount. Might be collections generated per call center headcount. It could be call center operating expense as a % of call center revenue generated. But it's important to recognize that there is a distinction between these 2. Operational metrics are for running your call center internally and making it as effective as it can be. The business effectiveness metrics are about how well you are supporting the company's business mission. Now we're going to look at each of these independently. We're going to start by looking at the operational metrics. Here on page 26, I've listed 25 of the most common key performance indicators in the operational arena. We've got cost metrics, quality metrics, productivity metrics, agent metrics, service level and call handling metrics. Now this is not all inclusive. There are literally hundreds of key performance indicators in addition to what I've shown right here. But these represent what we see most often in this industry. But it does present an issue, and the issue is this. That's a lot of data to keep track of. That's a lot of metrics, and it points out a common problem in this industry, which historically is this. Organizations track way too many metrics and don't do much with them. They don't do much analysis. They don't do much action planning, and as a result, they never take any action, or they take very little action. But as you move up this pyramid, the value increases. That's what this arrow is showing here. And a handful of organizations that we have worked with, and an increasing number of organizations over the last 3 to 5 years, have basically turned this pyramid upside down. And they're saying, in effect, that when it comes to performance measurement, less is more. What we need are a handful of metrics that we doggedly track, but that we also analyze very effectively and aggressively, and then develop action plans based upon those metrics. And finally, we take action based upon all of that. So the focus needs to be on action and action planning, not on measurement per se. And it's this holistic approach to managing and measuring an organization that gives you potentially a competitive advantage here. So with that in mind, here's the short list of metrics that really matter, the short list of operational metrics. We've got cost and quality as measured by cost per contact and customer satisfaction. This would be for a typical inbound customer service call center. You've got productivity metrics like agent utilization. You've got call handling metrics like FCR or first contact resolution rate. Now the cost and quality metrics are referred to as foundation metrics because ultimately everything you do in a call center boils down to one of two things. You are either containing costs or you are trying to drive a higher quality customer experience. Nothing else matters. And I know that sounds very draconian, but that's the reality. Everything you do in your call center has got to boil down to one of those two things. It doesn't matter if it's a training program, a technology decision, a hiring decision, an organizational decision. If it doesn't have the long-term effect of either reducing your costs or driving a higher quality customer experience, it just isn't worth doing. It's as simple as that. But if I'm doing an assessment or a benchmark of a call center and I find that, well, gee, the cost is high and the customer satisfaction is low, I can only impact those two metrics by their underlying drivers. And specifically, agent utilization is the primary driver of cost per contact. Call centers are labor-intensive functions, and any serious effort to contain the cost, or especially to reduce the cost, has to look at labor productivity. So agent utilization is the big driver of cost per contact. And if I want to improve the cost within a call center, typically agent utilization or human resource productivity is what you need to be looking at. Likewise, for customer satisfaction, the big driver is first contact resolution rate. And again, our example here is for an inbound customer service call center. That is, FCR drives customer satisfaction. And typically, if the customer satisfaction is not where it needs to be, you can address it by improving first contact resolution rates through training, through knowledge management systems, and other technologies that enable you to drive a higher first contact resolution rate. Then we've got agent job satisfaction. A lot of people see this as a nice to have but not necessary, but I would disagree with that. I would say that agent job satisfaction is one of the most important metrics, not as important as cost or customer satisfaction, but very close behind that is agent job satisfaction. And the reason it's so important is because it's a bellwether metric. It has a ripple effect. It has an indirect effect on almost every other metric in the call center. And what we found is that if agent job satisfaction is good, almost everything else takes care of itself. Your costs will be in line, your customer satisfaction will be good, your absenteeism rates will be low, your turnover will be reasonable to manage. So this is a very critical metric. And what we tell our call center manager clients is, we don't care if you know how to answer a call or not. We don't care if you know the difference between an abandoned call and an ACD. What we do care about is whether or not you can proactively manage your agents in such a way that you can maintain a high level of morale, which in turn translates into high levels of agent job satisfaction, because we know that's going to have a positive ripple effect throughout the organization. Finally, we've got a couple of aggregate metrics. One of them is just a two-dimensional chart showing cost versus quality, and I showed an example of one a few minutes ago. And the other is the balanced scorecard. Now, if you're interested, we do have a white paper on our website that you can download that's going to go into more detail than I've just gone into on these metrics. You can download it from MetricNet.com. It's called Call Center Performance Metrics, or the 5 most important KPIs for the call center. I'm going to go through these in a little bit more detail, starting with cost versus quality. And what I've shown on this two-dimensional chart is cost as measured by cost per contact on the x-axis, and quality as measured by customer satisfaction on the y-axis. Now, the y-axis is very intuitive. We've got lower quality down here, higher quality up here. Cost, however, I've flipped the axis. It's somewhat counterintuitive. We've got lower cost on the right, higher cost on the left. Now, the reason I did this is I wanted to create 4 quadrants. So this upper right-hand quadrant is where you have both low cost and high quality. And that is the holy grail for any call center. That is the holy grail for any service or support organization, is to be both low cost and high quality. Now, if you end up over here, what this says is that you're high quality, but you're also high cost. And over time, what you need to do is be reducing your cost to get into the upper right-hand quadrant. If you're in this lower right quadrant, it says that you are low cost, but you're also low quality. And over time, you need to figure out how to improve the quality of service so that you can get into this upper right-hand quadrant. And if you're in the lower left quadrant, where you're both high cost and low quality, you need to be taking action on both dimensions. You need to be reducing cost over time and improving the quality of service over time, so that ultimately you end up in this upper right-hand quadrant. Again, that's where you want to be. As any service and support organization, any call center wants to be both low cost and high quality. That is the holy grail of running an organization like this. Now, the second aggregate metric I referred to was the balanced scorecard. And what I'm showing on page 30 is a sample balanced scorecard put together, once again, by an inbound contact center, a client of MetricNet's. What we have in the scorecard are 5 key performance indicators as shown on the left. These represent what our client, and we agreed with them, believed to be the 5 most important metrics in the call center. They then put a weight on each of those metrics. You can see that cost and customer satisfaction are overweighted. A metric like percent of calls answered in 20 seconds has a relatively low weight of just 10%. Then for their benchmarking peer group, meaning a group of other call centers that looks like them in scope and scale and complexity and geography, we showed the worst performance for each of the 5 metrics and the best performance. So this was a peer group of approximately, what does that look like, maybe 20? Approximately 20 other call centers. We showed what the worst performance on each of these KPIs was and what the best performance on each of these KPIs was. Then our client put their own performance in the 3rd column from the right and calculated a metric score in the 2nd column from the right using this formula. It's an interpolation formula that looks at worst case minus their actual performance, that's the numerator for the metric, divided by the range, which is the worst case minus the best case. So again, it's a simple linear interpolation formula, and you will end up with a metric score that ranges between 0 and 100%. If you're at 100%, it says that you have the best score relative to a benchmarking peer group. If you're at 0%, it says you have the worst score. So the metric score gives you an indication of how far along the path you are from the worst performer to the best performer. A high score like this one on cost per contact says that they are much closer to the best end of the spectrum than they are to the worst end of the spectrum. By contrast, a low score, as they have here for the percent of calls answered in 20 seconds, says that their result, 44.1%, is much closer to the worst end of the spectrum than it is to the best end of the spectrum. The last step in constructing your scorecard is to multiply each metric score by each metric weighting to come up with a balanced score for each metric. When you add those up, you end up with a single score that will range between 0 and 100%. Now, you might look at that and think, well, what does that mean? Well, initially, when you do a balanced scorecard and set it up, the first score might not be terribly meaningful. But over time, if you are tracking this, if you're updating it monthly or at least quarterly, it's going to tell you something. If it's moving up, it says that on balance, when you look at cost and quality and productivity and agent metrics and service level metrics that on balance you are improving over time. By contrast, if the number's going down, it tells you just the opposite. So it's very good for trending. But it's also very helpful when you compare yourself to other call centers, as we've done here on page 31. As I mentioned, there's roughly 20 call centers that are being represented here. Are hypothetical. It's not hypothetical. It's a real company, but we've called them company XYZ on this chart here. Their score was 77.4%. That's the number that shows up here. They are the orange bar. All of the other bars represent other call centers that were in this benchmarking peer group. You can see that the scores range from a low of 30.8%, that's call center number 3, to a high of 78.2%, that's call center number 9. So our client actually performed quite well with a score of 77.4%. Now when we run literally hundreds or thousands of call centers worldwide through this algorithm, we end up with an average score of right around 50%. Moreover, it's a bell-shaped curve. It's a normal distribution, centered right above 50%, with tails running off to the right above 70%, tails running off to the left, typically below 30%. Anyone generally that's over 50% is at least in the second quartile for performance, and typically when you're above 60%, you are in the top quartile. So the balanced scorecard normalizes and aggregates a series of disparate metrics and gives you an overall score that you can track and trend, as this particular company did here on page 32. You can see the blue bars represent their call center scores measured and updated each month over a 12-month period of time, and the purple background represents the trailing 12-month average. So you can see that the trend was clearly in the right direction, and also when compared against a peer group of other call centers, the score was quite good. So it's valuable for trending. It's valuable for comparison purposes, that is, put you on a level playing field with other call centers, and it's also very valuable for communicating your performance to a lay audience that doesn't really know that much about call center performance. Because you've got a lot of different metrics here, and they oftentimes move in different directions. If cost goes down, but customer satisfaction also goes down, is that good or bad? Well, you don't know. But if you put it all in a scorecard like this, despite whatever direction the metrics might be moving and whatever confusion that might cause, the balanced scorecard will give you a single overall score. Consider it your letter grade for the month or for the quarter. It tells you how you're performing. It enables you to benchmark against other organizations, and it allows you to track and trend your performance over time. So that is the value of these aggregate metrics. Now I'm going to talk about these other 5 metrics in a few minutes, but before I do, remember we've got something called business effectiveness metrics, and I do want to talk about those briefly. Now these are highly dependent upon the type of services you're offered. They're really no standard set of measures, unlike the operational metrics where you typically do look at things like customer satisfaction and cost per contact and speed of answer. When it comes to business effectiveness, it will depend highly on the business that you're in. There's a lot of room here for creativity. Now, in some cases, we have found that business effectiveness becomes more important than operational effectiveness. In other words, it trumps operational effectiveness. Let me give you an example. If you've got an inbound or an outbound sales center and they're just burning the house down making a lot of sales, oftentimes management will look the other way at the operational effectiveness. In other words, they will ignore operational effectiveness. So it doesn't matter if your operational effectiveness metrics are not very good. Now, I'm not endorsing this. I'm saying that it oftentimes happens where if the business effectiveness is really strong, operational effectiveness will sometimes be ignored. And this does allow some sloppiness on the operational side of the call center, so it's something that you need to watch out for. There are also